You're listening to Let's Get Surety. Let me hear your bonding talk with Kat Shamapande.
Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Get Surety. It's Kat Shamapande, and I have my co-host Mark McCallum, CEO of NASBP, with me. Hey Mark.
Hey, it's great to be again with you on what I know is going to be a real timely topic.
Yeah, so there's been so much conversation on Capitol Hill regarding connectivity and broadband, especially in the rural parts of the country. So the COVID pandemic has really highlighted the need to move quickly here, since everyone is working remotely, going to school remotely, seeing their doctor remotely. That connectivity issue has really come to the forefront. So on today's podcast, we have guests who will be discussing rural broadband infrastructure projects and the recently enacted Rural Broadband Data Act and draft legislative language that NASBP and the National Society of Professional Surveyors, or NSPS, are pursuing. So joining us to have this conversation today, we have Larry LeClair. He's the Director of GR at NASBP. Hey, Larry.
Hey, good morning, Kat. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
We also have John, or JB Byrd, and he's representing the National Society of Professional Surveyors. Hey, John, or JB. Should I call you JB?
Hey, JB's fine. Yes,
Great.
And good morning, Kat. Good morning, Mark. Thank you very much for hosting me.
Good morning, JB.
It's great to have you. So before we get started, JB, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and describe the members at NSPS to us?
Yes. Yes, I work in Fairfax, Virginia. That's where I'm based. And I work for a small consulting firm. And a couple of our clients are connected to surveying, mapping, and geospatial data collection, management, and dissemination. A prominent one for almost a decade now is NSPS, the National Society of Professional Surveyors. We also help represent a coalition of geospatial firm executives known as USGEO, the Geospatial Executives Organization. And then finally, a relatively brand new group deals with subsurface utility engineering. It's called the SUE Association, SUEA. And that's basically the easy way to think about that. That's where the land surveyors overlap with the engineers, specifically civil engineers and professional engineers, in determining how to map things underground, specifically infrastructure. So a lot of our folks will do data collection above ground for infrastructure, but also underground for infrastructure.
Great. So Larry, how did NASBP and NSPS get started in pursuing this legislation? How did we all come together?
So how we became involved with this particular issue dates back to 2017, where a small internet service provider from Salisbury, Maryland, reached out to us. This particular small ISP was attempting to bid on one of the federal communications rural broadband projects, and was told that in order to do so, that company needed to furnish a letter of credit. And a letter of credit, of course, is a bank instrument. And the particular bank that it was, the small ISP was attempting to obtain an LOC from, required 100% collateralization of the letter of credit, which of course goes against the balance sheet and the cash liquidity of that small ISP. So it reached out to NASBP, but in the meantime, it also reached out to the Small Business Administration's Office of Surety Guarantee. They said, well, we don't have a particular bond that can actually protect ISPs in that particular space, but why don't you go to the National Association of Surety Bond Producers, and they may be able to help you. So that's how we became involved in this conversation. It dates back from 2017. And since that time, we've been trying to assist small ISPs into this market space.
So, Larry, it seems like this really is kind of a larger small business issue, particularly for those that are struggling with the working capital. Do you think that is correct?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just, NASBP, Mark, that's been involved. There's a number of ISPs or trade associations whom represent ISPs. that have actually reached out to not only members of Congress, but have actually sent letters to the FCC stating that a letter of credit is certainly a detriment to small ISPs, and what can the FCC do to lessen that requirement? And they've looked at it and actually in their letters said, why can't the FCC look at other forms of security to protect the federal government's interests, but allow more small ISPs to participate in these particular rural broadband auctions?
Larry, it sounds like it's a pretty easy solution and a simple approach. I'm sure that's not the case, however.
Well, as you know, Mark, simplicity sometimes gets in the way of good legislation, and it seems like it would be a simple fix, certainly, but it's difficult sometimes, as we know, to not only persuade 435 members of the House, but another 100 members of the U.S. Senate to believe that the fix would be simple. So that's how JB and I got involved with this. He'll talk a little bit about his issues that seem to be simplistic, broadening out mapping so that rural communities can connect, as well as allowing a greater number of small businesses to participate. Both seem to be pretty simplistic fixes. But as JB and I have learned, they may not be so simple.
So JB, sounds like maybe your folks also have issues with respect how rural broadband is being administered and funded.
Correct, Mark. So yeah, just to echo Larry's hinting there about sometimes it can be somewhat frustrating to get progress on any one issue. But what we found is there is almost unanimous consent, universal agreement by senators, House members, and congressional staff that the one thing everyone seems to agree on is that the mapping for the national broadband map and then what that means for rural broadband infrastructure deployment, the actual mapping itself is basically has to be ripped up and start from scratch. And there was a bill enacted into law earlier this year called the Broadband Data Act that seeks to improve the mapping standards and improve the mapping data so that as millions and billions of dollars happen to be spent, whether it's from the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, or the Department of Commerce or the Secretary of Agriculture, those are really where the money is going to be coming out of DC and into state and local projects for rural broadband deployment. But everyone seems to agree that the mapping is very flawed right now. And so the bill that was enacted back in April, it's Public Law 116-130. That is the Broadband Data Act. There's going to be a lot of money that will be dispersed and spent later this year on trying to improve the deployment. But you can't really, there's a great frustration about where to site and where to permit the actual infrastructure based on how faulty the mapping is right now. So we're kind of in a holding pattern right now. And that provided, I think, both Larry and myself an opportunity to engage Congress and to try to make some asks. So that's kind of how I think that was the genesis for getting Larry and I together.
Hey, JB, I'm a little slow on the uptake on some of these issues. Mapping, can you tell me or give me a little bit of a definition on what that means with respect to rural broadband? Does that have something to do with how they decide on funding, or what exactly is mapping?
So the National Broadband Map arose out of the 2008 stimulus. And it was put together kind of hastily done, but almost now over a decade later, I guess now 12 years later, the mapping is flawed. And so the efforts right now to improve the mapping would be to leverage capabilities in different platforms, whether it's taken from satellite imagery, or a lot of folks that we deal with in the infrastructure community look for survey grade data. And that can be done through airborne platforms such as unmanned aerial systems, such as general aviation aircraft, such as helicopters, or a lot of the folks that you'll see on the side of the road are members that do land surveying and used terrestrial technology to map things. It's all about location, and a lot of it's GPS referenced. Now, what the FCC has relied on, unfortunately, are a collaborative effort, and it's mostly patchwork. One state to the next had different data standards, and the goal was to have an interoperable map. But when you have 50 different states and the territories doing their own thing, it didn't really make sense at the end of the day. And so that Broadband Data Act that was enacted earlier this year, that's kind of a 2.0 version of the national broadband map, and we're in the really early stages of that bill being implemented.
Wow. So it sounds like we need more precise mapping to know exactly what is needed out there. And then we need to permit small businesses to compete to provide, rural broadband infrastructure and services. So how have you been going about, JB, convincing members of Congress to spend their attention on this?
Well, two things that we have as major assets. Number one, Larry LeClair. I mean, teaming up with Larry on this effort has been invaluable to NSPS from my point of view when it comes to reaching out, conducting the lobbying efforts to members of the Senate and the House, but Congress in general. And we'll get into the details soon about additional outreach to the FCC and other major players in this arena, if you will. The second major asset that the surveyors have is an excellent relationship with the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, and a lot of the mapping data, the surveying and geospatial data efforts that are underway in that agency within the Department of the Interior. So I would say that those are two big things and two big assets that I've been trying to leverage in this entire lobbying effort that we've been engaged with NASBP.
Great. Larry, I know a lot of your portfolio deals with small business issues. Have you found that to be of help in going up on the Hill and trying to address this issue?
Well, absolutely, Mark. And I was tallying up the number of calls since we've been at home working remotely. And JB and I have been on roughly close to 50 conference calls since the end of February. The last time that JB and I were actually in an office together, we lobbied Mr. Clyburn's professional staffer, and that was on February, I believe, the 28th. And Mr. Clyburn actually spearheaded a rural broadband task force. Since the 28th of February, we met with roughly about a dozen or so of those caucus members that are on the task force, as well as, House Small Business Committee, Senate committee members who serve on Commerce, who have actually jurisdiction over rural broadband. So, of the 50 calls, we've sort of identified those key committees and those members that serve on either Commerce, rural broadband, Ways and Means, and other committees that have jurisdiction over the rural broadband infrastructure portfolio. And just to echo what JB said about NASBP, NSPS and JB Byrd have been fantastic to work with. JB has so many contacts on the Hill, has opened doors for NASBP, and I can't thank him enough for everything he's done for the association. He's just been great to work with. And sometimes it gets to the point, where we do these calls with staff, and it's gotten to the point where JB can, recite what a bond is, a three-party financial guarantee, and he kind of goes through what Larry LeClair speak here, So now I've gotten to the point now where I can say, well, LIDAR is blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of funny, the yin and yang going back and forth between us, because we can't see each other, but we have a great rapport, and I can't thank JB enough for everything he's done on behalf of NASBP.
Well, that sounds pretty critical to know each other's issues and to be working collaborative, because what you both have told us is that this isn't really that easy an issue with all those committees and interest areas in Congress that overlap, have jurisdiction, or think of this as a priority. It sounds like you still have a lot more visits to make and a lot more elevator speeches to do. So you mentioned the FCC. So then I imagine you're dealing with committees in the House and Senate that have jurisdiction on their matters. Is that correct?
Yes, Mark, that's correct. Whether it be, commerce or in the Senate, we've really focused our outreach really has focused on commerce and Senator Wicker's office, who actually was the author on the Senate side of the Rural Broadband Data Act. So we've really focused on his staff. And JB, you want to jump in and talk a little bit about the outreach on the House side, not only with the Small Business Committee and Chairwoman Velazquez, but you can also hit on the House side too. JB is really up to date. He's really been instrumental on the House side. He's got some great contacts on that part of the chamber, that side of the.
Well, appreciate that, Larry. So I think the chronology was when we started, as Larry mentioned, when we started with Chairman Clyburn and his Rural Broadband Task Force. A lot of the opportunities and action at that time were in the House. So we were trying to really do the messaging and the outreach. The interesting thing is that anytime you come up with a new idea, or at least our respective organizations take a new idea to the Hill, you're going up against the status quo. And so, yes, the committees of jurisdiction are basically a good entry point, but you really have to micro-target down to the member office level. So we were, as Larry mentioned, we focused first on the Rural Broadband Task Force members. And then we also moved to the Rural Broadband Caucus leadership, both Republicans and Democrats in the House. We also identified a House member from South Dakota, who before coming to Congress was in the telecom infrastructure business. And so, we basically tried to identify not just folks in position to help us, but also had an intellectual capacity to understand what we're trying to do, and then hopefully go to bat for us. And so that's really where we spent the majority of our time on the House side, Larry.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And what we did was, we identified those task force members, and a good majority of those members, of course, they serve on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction or was involved with the Rural Broadband Data Act. That's one committee. The other committee would be the Spending Committee of the Ways and Means. So there's some overlap with task force members that serve on both Energy and Commerce, Ways and Means. We would go down through the roster of those committees. Okay, is this particular member on Ways and Means or Energy and Commerce? Do they serve on the task force? So we tried to make the connection between the committees and the task force members too, if that helps.
And I think we had one other another committee we engaged was the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee in the House. Ranking member Sam Graves of Missouri came out with a bill to try to also take a look at the deployment of infrastructure, not just in his district, but in other rural areas of the country. So we did reach out to that committee as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I would say there have been a number of bills that have been introduced, subsequent to the Rural Broadband Data Act. So whenever we've identified a particular piece of legislation, whether it be the Graves bill or other bills that are on the Senate side talking about, potentially expanding rural broadband opportunities for education, for healthcare, we would make a big effort to reach out to those offices to talk about our particular issues, to perhaps look for a vehicle that we could get our language inserted into. So we're not only looking at the Rural Broadband Data Act, we're also looking at potential other vehicles, both in the House and the Senate, that have been recently introduced as well.
So I want to back up for just a minute and ask you if you have had an opportunity to meet with the FCC to kind of attack some of the problems from the agency standpoint. Have JB, Larry, have you been able to have those conversations with the FCC?
Yes, Mark. So the FCC, with the primary jurisdiction about all these policies related to broadband in general, but specifically rural broadband infrastructure deployment. It took us a while, but thanks to our contacts on the Senate Commerce Committee, as Larry mentioned, Chairman Wicker, and then Ranking Member Cantwell from Washington State, their respective committee staffers did put us in contact and provided us information on how to reach the FCC staffers. And thanks to Larry, we were able to get a meeting with Commissioner Rosenworcel's staff, and that was probably recently, and that was a very educational opportunity because they were not up to speed, certainly on the mapping angles to the technology involved. And I'll let Larry talk about his issue.
Yeah, and this comes from our NASBP's contact with Senator Ben Cardin's office of Maryland. We had a good, thorough discussion on the issues, and certainly Senator Cardin remembers NASBP dating back several years ago when he was a primary author of expanding the opportunities through the SBA Surety Bond Guarantee Program. So the office certainly remembered who NASBP is and was, and from there we had a good conversation about the particular issues dealing with rural broadband data and offering potentially a bond versus a letter of credit security piece. We mentioned that we were having difficulty reaching out to the FCC. The Cardin office works closely with the FCC and put us in contact with Commissioner Rosenworcel's office. So we were able to reach out, and that was because of Senator Cardin and their willingness to provide contacts at the FCC's office.
And that was, I think the relevance there was the timing was such that the FCC meets once a month publicly. And they were in the middle of taking a look at their agenda and putting together some votes connected to the rural broadband money that's going to be dispersed later this year. So the timing of our call with Commissioner Rosenworcel's staff was very helpful. It was about a week or so from the public meeting. And so what that staffer was able to do was to take the intel and the pitch from both Larry and myself, and then provide a memo to the commissioner. Now, she's just one of the 5 commissioners on the FCC, but she is very well respected, and it's a very much an independent agency. So I think through Larry's contacts with Senator Cardin, I think we were able to leverage that to help message a timely message on this issue.
Oh, that's great. Well, gentlemen, it sounds like you've laid quite the foundation to make advancements on this issue, both for NASBP and for NSPS. I think in our next podcast, we'll look forward to hearing to some of the things that you hope to translate into action, perhaps, for example, legislative language and maybe even a bill introduction. So thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. If anyone wants more information on NSPS's GR, is there anywhere they should go, JB?
Yes, thank you, Kat, and thanks again, Mark, for this opportunity. So the NSPS website, nsps.us.com, we have also a series of podcasts, and one of which is specifically on policy, and it's known as Surveyor Says, the podcast, and it's known as Point of Order. And so that's something that our executive director, Kurt Sumner, does periodically, and we look forward to engaging NASBP on a future opportunity.
Great. And Larry, is there anywhere someone should go if they want some more information on NASBP's GR efforts?
Well, thank you, Kat. I would go to the tab at the top of our homepage, Advocacy tab, and from there you'll find a whole host of information dealing with white papers, our government relations agenda, maps that showcase what's going on in the P3 space, various statutes on the Miller Act, the state Little Miller Acts. So there's just a whole host of information, and I would suggest folks go to the advocacy page at the top of the homepage.
Great. Well, thank you guys both so much for joining us. I can't wait to talk to you on another episode.
You've been listening to Let's Get Surety, brought to you by the National Association of Surety Bond Producers. For more information about the NASBP and its members, visit nasbp.org.